All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Public comment? Do we
Wait a
have
minute,
public comment?
I gotta turn the public on so they can talk.
Okay,
Okay. All right, and let me unmute them. Oh wait, what did I just do? Unmute. Okay, I think the public should be on now so they can talk if they want to.
does anyone have any comments that is not already on the agenda?
I have a comment or question slash, I don't know, Amy, I don't know how to word what I have, you know, kind of, I just want to talk about what I'm trying to do.
This is for the Planning Commission. This is the information I sent earlier this afternoon. Nicole is on because she wants to make a request to add a use into the agricultural zoning district. She was supposed to be at your March meeting and then the world sort of blew up. So we've been trying to hold off on this until we were back in person again, because obviously Zoom has its limitations. But Nicole wants to talk a little bit about a request. This wouldn't be a full agenda item, but this would be for the Planning Commission to decide if you want to put this on your agenda for next month and what information you would need from us so that you could vet the request. So Nicole, if you want to go ahead and I did give them I did email out your letter. So if you want to go ahead and discuss it.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I don't really understand the format of all of this, so I'll just kind of share what I want, and then you can tell me if I'm off track or whatever. As Amy noted, she sent the information in terms of the letter of what I'm looking for. I was at the first Board of Supervisors meeting on March 9th to then be able to move forward to this meeting. And then, as Amy mentioned, we got on shutdown. So I was on the agenda for the March meeting with you guys, and then now I'm just kind of in this pause until we can kind of get out of whatever we're working through right now in terms of the stay-at-home order. So what I am hoping to understand in this, I guess I have 5 minutes here just to kind of summarize. I am looking to expand my business. It's almost 6 years that it's been open. I'm in Ferguson Township, currently over by Gigi's, and I'm looking to expand at 1008 Shingletown Road. The property is currently up on the market and there is an offer in place. The contingency got lifted, so I am now able to move forward with my offer, but I need at least some understanding in terms of just knowing that I can make movement here. I know that it will take time, as Amy has so clearly helped me understand as I'm trying to understand all this government stuff. I'm just a therapist and energy person. I don't get all this government thing. So she's helped me understand, you know, that it could be a long process for sure in terms of everything that you have to do. I do have an abundance of places across the Commonwealth in terms of wellness centers. What I do, we are all located in agricultural or residential zoning areas because we need to have the ability to be away from commercial zoning areas and all the noise and chaos, and we need access to the outdoors in terms of some of the sustainability teaching we do, organic gardening, living in nature and with the earth. So I have a list already compiled. I spoke with all of the owners in all of these different wellness centers across our Commonwealth, and I can certainly gain or gather as many as you need. And the point of why I did that was I don't know any of you. I don't think any of you know me, but I trust that all of you know what you're doing. And I know that this is very possible. Again, it's done all over the country, but all over the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So by providing that, hopefully it would give you guys some clarity on how together we can bring this to Harris Township. I have lived in this township for over 20 years. I'm from outside of the Philadelphia area, and I love this community. I live here in Boalsburg, and I would love to bring what I'm trying to do to Harris Township. I know all communities are trying to figure out how they're going to have sustainability financially within their townships with the new way of living. And I assure you, I have a successful business, and I have a plethora of individuals in our State College, Center County, and outskirt communities who come to us for wellness, and what we will be able to do and expand in our community in terms of the healing and mental health therapy that our community is greatly in need of. I just need to understand what you guys need from me. I know that there's going to be questions in terms of sewage. Amy had kind of given me that indication and a little bit of awareness last month. I I also know there's going to be questions about parking. I've got a plan in place for that. I have some individuals lined up who can help me in terms of what all the language needs to happen there. So I guess I just need to know from you guys, like, what kind of questions you'd have for me and what are my guidelines? Like, am I allowed to be communicating with you between meetings? So for example, if you throw out 3 questions that you need, can I email somebody those questions? Because my struggle here, and I know it is my personal struggle, not any of your struggles, my urgency is not yours, totally get it. But this process has been in place since February, and I am under this urgency because at any moment, someone can take this property. And I won't bore you with the significance in terms of my heart space of what this property means to me, but it has been in my heart space for over 7 years now, and now it has become available. And I cannot tell you how much it would mean for me to be able to move forward. I just don't know what I have to do. And I don't know government stuff. I don't, to be perfectly honest, have any interest in learning about it. I just need to know what you guys need from me and how I can do this so that you guys can help me make it happen. Thank you. I don't know if that was enough or you need more or what.
Are we supposed to comment now, or should we wait for another point?
No, you can comment now.
Okay. Okay, so the last 5 years or so that I've been on this, we've been trying to sustain our agricultural and forest areas and keep these spaces open and to a point of what they do. I do not know what a health center has to do with being in an agricultural area or what it promotes to the agricultural community. And I thought that's what we were going to. It sounds to me like this is a health center.
Sure. Can I answer? Am I allowed to answer that
Sure,
question?
Nicole, you can answer any questions.
Okay, perfect. So the Wellness Center, what we do is we specialize in mental health treatment and trauma recovery. And in that, we offer different types of services in terms of sustainability, living organically, helping understand gardening, how to do composting. So we help in terms of helping to understand food as medicine, helping to understand how to grow your own food, how to live within the connection with Earth. And in terms of our center, those are the things we offer. And that's kind of what usually wellness centers are. And in the first meeting, I don't know the gentleman who asked the question, he just said, you know, wanting to expand a little bit on in terms of what a wellness center is. And I can certainly kind of hone in that language a little bit better. But it's more away from commercial zoning because it's more living within agriculture, living within the earth, living and knowing how to live sustainably with our land. I don't know if that answered your question, Jeff.
Not particularly, because I read the article that she sent in, and it seems like that there were mental health therapists, there were massage therapists, there were yoga instruction, there were yoga classes, and it continued on. I don't have it in front of me because I'm on my phone, but I read that whole list and I didn't see but maybe one item about, you know, we were going to teach organic gardening. So back to this, it sounds like this is a health center to me, and it's not really an agricultural entity, you know, that we've always been trying to promote. And
Certainly.
also, are we going to sell products at this place? Are you going to sell vitamins? Are you going to sell products, creams, and things that are going to be made off-site, where we went through the whole argument about having the farmers be able to have a store, but so much stuff in their store should have been produced on their property.
Sure, I understand. I kind of what your question is in terms of it's an integrative model of healthcare. So it's, yes, there is yoga, there is meditation, there is massage, because it's an integrative 11-point model of how to holistically heal ourselves through the whole system. So it is, that's why we're looking to expand. We outgrew our space within 3 months of opening because it is about the whole body system. But yes, I understand, just kind of like how the RE farm just got approved for a restaurant and agricultural zoning in Ferguson Township. I understand there's all these dynamics of what is supposed to hold within agricultural that I don't understand. I just know that wellness centers are in agricultural zones all across Pennsylvania. That I am 100% certain of, and I can give you a long list. Some are in over 40 acres, some as little as 5 acres, and some a little less. So they are located primarily in agricultural zones.
So I'll just comment. This is Kent. When I first read the letter, I had the similar impression to Jeff. I was picturing like a fitness center type operation, with clients coming in and going through a variety of treatments or whatever. And I didn't see anything on here either. It dealt with getting outside and doing things. So my first take was I could see doing something like this as a home occupation on an extremely limited basis with very, very few people. But it sounded more commercial to me as well. So I guess what I would suggest is that if you know of other areas where this is in agricultural areas, if you could share that with staff and they could determine, what type of zoning is in place in these other areas in the state that do this. Is it just, I wasn't getting it right, and I'm still not getting it right now either.
Sure, and I can clarify in terms of the outdoor, and I can expand that on the letter. There's like outdoor meditations, there's gardening, organic gardening, sustainability learning, how to live with the earth. There's a lot of outdoor in terms of even yoga outdoor. That's one of the primary reasons where I'm looking to expand is for outdoor. We need the outdoor. And it wouldn't be, my business model would not be able to be run by just a small entity like me within the business. I could certainly do that just as a therapist, but that's not the business model of Serenity. It is about a collection of holistic therapists to work on the full body system.
Nicole,
Yes.
this is Bill. Can you tell me how big this piece of property is? And is there a structure already on it, or would you be building one?
Yes, absolutely. It is on 3.2 acres. There are 2 structures on the property. One is a large home that has 4 bedrooms, 3 larger areas downstairs, and then a basement area, a 2-port garage, and then there's a large outbuilding that is almost complete. I don't know the dimensions, but it's a pretty large outbuilding that has a downstairs and an up loft area. And then there's just like a little shed. But yes, there's 2 large buildings. I would not be building anything. I would be completing the outbuilding, which just needs some drywall put up, and then just expanding and using the parking lot, expanding a parking lot area, et cetera.
The parking is an issue as I see it. If the lot is only 3 acres and it already has these buildings on it, I'm concerned that there's enough room for the traffic, the amount of traffic that your narrative indicates, and with the number of vendors that you're housing in the facility. I'd be especially concerned if some of these vendors have retail shops or things where they're selling products that would bring people in at times other than the yoga classes and or the workshops. But the ingress and egress off of Route 45 is somewhat problematic in my mind. We have speed limit issues on Shingletown Road. There's line of sight issues I'm concerned about with where that property is. And I just see the traffic and the parking as things that would have to be looked into very carefully.
Sure. And I can tell you in terms of people coming in for products outside of when we have operations happening, that is not the model of our business. You're only allowed to come by appointment only and when you are registered for a program. We also titrate out our practitioners to avoid a lot of interlap between the different individuals and clients who would come in, and we would be actually expanding that model of trickling because of the coronavirus and making sure that we're following all those safety guidelines. I also understand the traffic elements in terms of Shingletown, but right down the road, there is that large baseball field that also has substantial amount of traffic, far more than I would ever have at Serenity, as our capacity would be much, much less than that. And then I do already have out mapped a front area of the property that I would be happy if I'm allowed. I don't know if I'm allowed to email people between these, that I can kind of indicate on the mapping of the property where I envision the parking being. Again, I'm not a parking expert by any means. I just have it mapped out, and I do have someone who does that excavating that would be able to answer those final questions if I'm moving forward in that direction. But yes, I can certainly understand those points.
Nicole, those plans, I take it, were put together with in mind of no one parking on Route 45.
Yes, sir. Yes, that is correct. It's actually kind of like, well, if you don't know the property, you wouldn't know as I'm explaining, but it's all the way down in front of the home. So it's all the way away from the road. You go all the way down fully through the driveway, and then it's in front of the home structure in the front. It has a pretty large front yard, and so it would be into that area there.
Well, as far as comments and maps and site plans and that sort of thing, all of that will probably end up having to go to Amy so that she can distribute it to us. And I would love to see all of that stuff. Todd, my question is sort of what are the indications and contraindications as to, what we can do here? I mean, is this an agribusiness because of its connection to the land and nature and everything else like that? Or is this a commercial situation that just needs open space?
Well, I don't think we know enough about it yet to know if it's an agribusiness or if it is a commercial business strictly. I mean, one question I would have would be if Nicole or any of her contractors or vendors actually prescribe medicine, if that's something that goes on a regular basis or semi-regular basis. I think that shifts this more in the direction of it being an institutional use or something that's really not suited for our agricultural district, particularly since we spent the last 6, 7, 8 years discussing the types of things we want to see in our rural zoning districts, and this has not been one of them. I think one of the things we touched on very early when this request came in was the fact, we talked about some of these things, that I'm sure the septic system for the property was designed for a 4-bedroom house. It wasn't designed for 14, 20, 30, however many people that might be on the site at any given time under the information that Nicole has provided. And, a couple of things that we also have to keep in mind is even if the Planning Commission and Board of Supervisors decide this is a acceptable use for the rural zoning districts, and they're basing that assumption on the information provided by this particular requester, there's nothing to say that once this particular person's in place, everything could run very smoothly. But if she decides that in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years that property is no longer large enough for her business and she sells it to somebody else, they might have a completely different business model. And unless we have the regulations that we come up with designed to really limit the impacts on the rural areas surrounding this property, that could be a problem for us. And it's kind of difficult for me to talk about a particular property when we're talking about a request for a addition to a zoning district, because we're really not really supposed to do that. We're supposed to consider the entire zoning district whenever we're talking about any request for a change to a zoning ordinance. And the fact that we've talked exclusively about one property here when we should be talking about the effects on every property in combination with a request such as this is something that we probably ought to think about also.
Todd, if I may just answer your one question there.
Sure.
about the medication. We do not prescribe any medication. Actually, our model is non-medication based, and most individuals who come to see us within therapy are because they do not take psychiatric medication or want to get off of them. So I'm a holistic therapist, and so we are all plant-based and food is medicine, and using body, spirituality, and earth for healing, which is why we are locating an outdoor space and why most wellness centers are in the outdoors, because they do not prescribe medication. We're actually quite the opposite. I understand all those other things you said. I just don't have anything to say about those because that's a logistical thing with government. And, you know, I guess I do kind of get that this is not about a single property. Like, I know this property is with larger question about adding this to a zoning situation. And I do understand that. Again, Amy is, thank you so patiently with me, Amy, helping me to understand a little bit more about this process. And Todd, I know I talked with you right at the beginning, and you got to understand a little bit of my just complete lack of knowledge of all this government stuff. So I also thank you for your patience with that. But I do understand this is not about a single property. I'm talking about a single property. It's more about a zoning for in this this location, which is why I would be happy to send this list that I have going of all these other areas, because they are the same situation. It's a zoning situation within that they are then located. My last home address when I lived with my family, actually back in the Coatesville area, went through the same situation. Our home was sold to a physical therapist. And so they went through the whole zoning. We had the sewer system, we had the septic system. I get your question, which is why we're going to kind of get the information in terms of the septic, if I need to expand that, etc. I'm willing to do what I need to do to make this business happen. So I don't know the answers to all the rest, though.
Nicole, I think this is, you can tell this is a pretty complicated issue. It's not a simple exemption or, you know, for one property. We're a very deliberative group, a lot of things to consider. And I just wanted you to understand that these steps, I think while they'll be helpful, we need to definitely learn more about this. This is not something that's going to resolve itself in a month or two, in my view. Now, perhaps there's some expedited process here, but we want to listen, we want to talk, we want to deliberate, we want to educate. It's not going to happen tonight, and I would be surprised if it would resolve itself in June. So please consider that in your planning and what you would like to do next. And we're really happy that you are interested in expanding a business and expanding health in the area. It's super important. This may or may not be the place to do it.
Sure. Yes. Thank you for that clarification, Chris. And I do know that it will be quite a process and could take some time for sure. And I guess, totally understand that. And for me, in terms of like moving forward with my plan, I'm like, I know that it will take time. And I guess for my certainty or clarity as we move along, and maybe I'll get more clarity at the next meeting or maybe somehow before then, so I can make a contingency offer, because I'm willing and know that I might have to even, you know, pay mortgage on this place for a month or two before I can even be in operation, or even maybe a little bit longer than that. And I'm willing to take some risks there, as long as I know that, you know, it might take 4 months, et cetera, but that it's moving that direction. And I don't even know, again, I know nothing about, this is all new to me, this government stuff. I don't even know, like, if there's any way you guys can even give me any kind of clarification of like, okay, yeah, this is going to be a couple months down the line, but we see it moving that direction. Like, I don't even know. I have no clue if that's even something you guys can even do. I know not tonight, Chris. Thank you for clarifying that. Yes.
Nicole, this is Bill. Have you provided Amy or Todd with any information about other areas where wellness centers are in agricultural districts around the state, that they might be able to do a little bit of comparative work?
I have not forwarded that to Amy yet, but I do have that list compiled, and I would be happy to email that to her.
You know, I don't want to dismiss this whole thing out of hand, but as Chris said, this is going to be a very long process. And if Amy and Todd don't mind investigating entertaining a little further rather than us saying that it feels like it, shouldn't be considered. I'm interested in at least hearing a little bit more.
You, Bo. I guess Amy and Todd, are you guys like willing for that part?
If the planning commission wants to discuss this at their June meeting, we can certainly do a little bit more research on these type of wellness centers. I think what Chris and Bill have both said, if they do decide this is a use that they want to see, this could typically be a 6-month or longer process. For point of reference, it took us 11 months to get chickens on the books. So that's a very real thing. And they were already living here. So it could be quite a while. So I don't know how that plays into your time frame. But if you want to send over, the information that you have, you can send it to me. And then if the planning commission agrees, we can put this on their June agenda for more discussion.
One thing that I would be interested in knowing is that if we allow this type of human services business to be in our ag district, what other type of human services interest would we also then open the door for?
And that's what I'm thinking, a little bit of extra networking in some places where this is already going on might give us some other ideas.
Mm-hmm. So do you want this on your June agenda? Is that what I'm hearing?
I think I'd like to hear about a little more about it.
Okay.
Thank you everyone so much. I know you guys gave me more than 5 minutes. I appreciate it. And Amy, I will email you and I'll also email you like that map and just like a circle where I was thinking with parking, if that's helpful for someone to see as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you everyone. Have a great evening. And thank you again for listening.
You're welcome.
Okay, are we at a point where we are ready to approve an agenda for the evening?
Well, one second. Paul Rittenhouse is also on. I just want to see if Paul has anything he wants to say.
Yeah,
I can't see him.
I'm online, but I don't have anything at the moment to discuss. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to mute you again, Paul.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, can we approve the agenda for this evening?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Sounds
opposed?
like there's only like 4 of us here or something.
I can see you all.
Tonight.
I can see all of you.
I'm going by the manager's assertion that we have a quorum, even if we're not all speaking. So, all right. I am told by the agenda that there is no new business for the evening. Is that still the case?
That is still the case.
Then let us move on to old business and a conversation about the demolition delay ordinance.
Right, so since last month, we put together a very basic demolition delay ordinance that is based on the feedback that you gave us. Just as a reminder, this would basically apply to the Linden Hall Historic District, the Bollesburg National Historic District, and then 2 individual properties that are listed on the National Historic Registry. We tried to keep this as simple as possible based on, again, on the feedback you had given us previously. So not a lot in the way of public notification. We kept that fairly simple. Just having a notice of intent to demolish in the newspaper. The property owner, the developer would need to send that notice to adjacent property owners via certified mail, and then also post a sign on the property that is at least 24 by 36 inches in size and visible from the street. So once they have provided proof to the township that they've met the requirements of posting it in the newspaper and posting the sign, that would then begin a 30-day delay period. Once that delay period ends, staff would provide a letter to the applicant just stating that the ordinance's requirements had been met, and then they could present that to the Center Region Code Administration to get a demolition permit. The ordinance also has a little provision as well in the event that there's some type of structural failure, a fire, what have you. The building needs to be demolished as an emergency. They don't need to go through this process. They could get a demolition permit from the code office, and they would just need to provide some some information back to the township showing why they had to issue that permit without this process being followed. So those were, that's the basics of the ordinance. There's 2 new definitions. Again, this would only apply to something that we're defining as a historically significant structure. So there's a lot of buildings in these districts that are not considered historically significant that would not need to go through this notification period. So it would really be a matter of if it is something that is on the registry as a contributory structure in some way or another, or individually listed, they would have to then go through this process to demolish the entire thing. So that's an overview. I don't know if anyone has any comments or questions on it, but I'd be happy to try to answer them if you do.
I'm actually quite pleased with everything I've seen.
Mark, you changed basically the number of days. You modified it back to the days that we requested it to, back to 30, where we kicked around 60 or 90. So it seems like it's a pretty, it's not overly onerous in this situation. So I think you're heading, I think it's in the right direction.
Yeah, I like it as written. I think it's simple and covers the points that we talked about. I don't know who else would need to look at it or before we push it up the path.
I have a question. Are these specific houses and properties listed?
They are identified in the documents that were prepared and sent as part of the application for the National Historic District back in the 1970s when they were created. Those, I did provide the Planning Commission with a map. It was probably their last month or the month before that showed the locations of all the properties that
Months ago.
historic or have a historic structure on them. As I recall, I think maybe Linden Hall has a handful of properties that had accessory buildings that were considered significant, like an old barn or two. But other than that, it's mainly just the primary homes on the properties that are in Bollesburg that were identified as being historic. I don't think there were any accessory structures that were historic, but we do have a list of them, and there is a map of them. Certainly something we could, keep handy for the township offices to have a copy of, as well as the CRCA.
Okay, thank you.
I'm good if it is written. I just can't.
So are we at a point where we would say this should be forwarded to the supervisors, or is this something that goes back in the packet for approval with that zoning district at a later time?
Yeah, I think we'd want to hang on to it and do everything comprehensively to that zoning district, which is what we're trying to do with all of them. So.
Okay. And I believe the consensus is that we're okay with the way it is as written, and that's one more thing we can check off our list.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yep.
Okay.
Are we okay with moving on?
Sure.
Okay, family care facility regulations.
Okay, so last month, as part of the discussion on the permitted uses in the R1 zone, the Planning Commission had asked staff to do some research on the ability to further regulate family care facilities. Included in your packet this evening was a memo that I put together that includes information on family care facilities, as well as group homes and halfway houses, as well as some legal background on the Fair Housing Act of 1988. And some of the impacts it has on how we can regulate these uses through zoning regulations. So I think a couple of things I'd like to point out. The family care facilities themselves are permitted everywhere in the township that we basically allow single family dwellings. I think the district that they're not allowed in that has single family homes that's a permitted use is the cultural district, which I suppose could be problematic if someone were to try to establish one in that district someday. But these facilities, as defined, are only for up to 3 people, which is essentially the same definition as a family in Harris Township, 3 unrelated people. And then, of course, we do have other definitions for group homes and halfway houses. Those are in different zoning districts. I think I just want to point out that sometimes you'll see these family care facilities in some zoning ordinances are called group homes. These uses and these terms are used in different ways in different places with different occupancy limits. But generally speaking, anytime we are talking about any type of housing that involves care for disabled people or people who need any type of extra care beyond what they can provide to themselves, there's a lot of protections from the federal government. I think when our ordinance was originally adopted, or most recent version was adopted in the late 1970s, some of these protections probably did not exist. But since that time, there's been quite a bit of case law following the 1988 FHAA adoption that I think would probably be problematic if we kept some of these regulations that we currently have. Even our definition, I think, could possibly be challengeable. So we had some recommendations in here that we don't provide any new regulations for the family care facilities, but that we should probably make our definition consistent with the FHAA. And with the group homes and halfway houses, that was the thing we talked about last month, where you're only allowed to have one per block face. There's a lot of examples of where those types of regulations have been overturned because they're considered discriminatory. So I would recommend that we look at removing those from the ordinance as well, just so we can avoid any future challenges should we ever have one. So I don't know if anybody had any specific questions or any comments on my recommendations, but I'd be happy to try to answer any questions if you have any.
So Mark,
I have one comment. As far as, I mean, if somebody was going to do this, they would need to get a zoning permit for this use. So they wouldn't just assume that it's just a residence. I would assume they'd have to come in and get a permit that they're going to have a family care facility at a specific residence. And my thought is that the permit should clearly state that it's for the people that are in the facility itself, and that there's not services being done that are beyond the people that live there. It doesn't take off or something like that. There's additional services or extra people coming in or extra workers or other clients that visit this place. I think that would just be handled with a zoning permit. It'd just be clear that it's just clearly just for the people that live at the facility. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think at the very least, the property owner, either the current one or the future property owner, would have to complete the change in use zoning permit application, depending upon whether or not they proposed any improvements to the property as far as building additions or parking or anything else that they were going to propose. They may actually do something that triggers the land development ordinance, which would be a lot more extensive procedure, but at a very minimum, they would have to do a change in use zoning permit.
Yeah, putting in an access ramp or something like that would not change the land use. That would just be essentially a building permit, correct?
It may or may not require a building permit through Center Region Code. It may or may not require a zoning permit from our office. I think what Kent's talking about is the actual official use of the property would be changing. It would no longer be a single family residence. It would be a family care facility, because that is a named use in the zoning districts where it's allowed. So you just can't switch uses without getting approval through the township.
And the idea that, Kent, the idea is to make sure that those who are applying for such a facility would be informed as to what the limitations are.
Yeah, I mean, my own thought was that, clearly if it's, for the intention of, 1 to 3 people that live in the house and the caregivers, nurses or whatever that are frequenting the place, that it's for them and that it's not intended for, extra staff to come do, meetings and things like that. Not to turn it into
Which keeps the traffic situation down and a lot of the other concerns that we have about the neighborhood character being changed.
Mark, I had a question about the wording in the recommendation.
Sure.
first I'm reading that the second two, the group houses and the halfway houses, are not permitted in the R1 zone. And then I see where you're recommending that use regulations that limit their location by block face be removed from the ordinance. So it's really two questions. The group homes and halfway houses aren't allowed in R1. Is that a true statement?
That's correct.
And will still not be.
Correct.
So if there were 4 residents in one of these, as opposed to the maximum of 3, they would be classified as a group home.
I believe, yeah, I believe that's
Okay.
true. Todd can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, I agree.
Well, the group home has its own definition. Group home and halfway house, and all those things have their own definitions. Some of them are adjudicated individuals, some are non-adjudicated. They would have to meet the definition of whatever it is they're proposing to do on that property.
So I'm wrong in saying that the difference between a group home and a family care facility is just the number of residents. Am I wrong in saying that?
They could have the same clientele, I guess, under certain circumstances, if I'm remembering group homes correctly. My fuzzy recollection is that the group homes might be the non-adjudicated.
No, they have to be adjudicated, Todd.
Okay, so yeah, so that it wouldn't just be the number of people. It's the type of client that they would serve that would be different between the family care and the group home.
Okay, so a better wording of the sentence would be that staff recommends that the use regulations for family care facilities by block face, limiting their locations by block face,
Be removed.
removed from the ordinance.
We don't have anything currently in the ordinance that limits family care facilities
Okay,
by block face. It's
Okay.
only halfway homes and group homes. The reason I mentioned that it's not in the R1 zone is that it kind of went beyond what the purpose of our review had been.
okay,
We were only looking at family care, but as part of this, it seemed like let's talk about all of it at once, since group homes and
okay.
halfway houses are under the same law.
So the limitations by block face are going to get us into trouble if we don't get them out of there as well.
I think they certainly could, yes.
Okay. I'm no longer confused either. Thank you, George. So anything else to converse about that?
It seems like it's government law, so we
Yeah.
don't really have a choice.
There's only so much we are allowed to do here with that, right? Anybody else? Is there anything we should do about this other than recommend the changes that staff has recommended? Oh, did we lose somebody?
No, everybody's still there.
Okay, I heard
We
a
have to
tone.
do that, don't we? I mean, it's a requirement that in order to comply with the regulations, don't we have to build that into?
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to update our regulations to
Yeah,
match.
so that's all it needs done.
That would be the recommendation out of the discussion, is that staff take care of that, right?
Yeah, we'll get, same with just like the demolition delay ordinance, we'll update that as part of the package.
Okay. Anything else on that?
Yeah.
We move on to the solar regulations.
All right, I'm going to attempt to share my screen, so we'll see if this
Okay.
works. Oh crap, hold on. I'll do it this way.
I'm glad I'm not the only one this happens to.
I've never shared my screen before. Ah, look, there it is. That's what I want to share. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
No,
Yeah.
I can't.
PowerPoint, wow.
But we have this in front of us.
You do, but you have it now so that you can also see it.
Color.
So Mark can tell me when to move to the next slide and he can give us.
All right, I will do that. So why don't you go ahead and just go to the first slide a while.
Okay.
So over the past couple of weeks, as we've been, quarantining in that, Todd and I have been working on developing some accessory solar regulations. And as the Planning Commission will recall, and I'm probably going to answer a few of the questions that were sent to you from the public here earlier today. One of the reasons we started working on this is something that's been on your work plan for the last couple of years, and it seemed like something that would be fairly easy for us to start working on and bring you some ideas of where we think this could go and then get your feedback. So when we're talking about an accessory solar energy system, we're really talking about some solar collectors that are really intended only to serve the on-site use. So that's just important to remember, because I think there's questions about sizing and things like that. It's important to make sure that we don't have, someone deciding to put in a solar farm as an accessory use because they own 10 acres of land and that's what they want to do. That would be a different use altogether. So we are talking about just solar collectors that serve the property or the use that's on the property primarily. Obviously, there can be a little bit of spillover, but it should be fairly limited. You can go to the next slide, Amy. So currently, we do not have any regulations for accessory solar uses. I just wanted to point that out. We're not the only municipality that does not here in the region, but right now, their roof-mounted solar panels are just part of the building. Freestanding solar panels are treated like any other structure, so they have to get a zoning permit. And any type of zoning or any type of solar installation requires a building permit, whether or not it's on the roof or freestanding. So you can go ahead and go to the next one, Amy. So in the region, there are 3 other municipalities that have adopted some form of regulations for accessory solar uses. We did look at these regulations as well as a lot of model ordinances from across the nation. To say there's a couple would be an understatement. It seems like every state has 4 or 5 model ordinances, and then there's all these different companies and firms that are trying to put out what they think is the best in the way of solar regulation. It's really not a one-size-fits-all thing. It really varies by municipality. Some locations are extremely strict. They regulate everything down to going out with special instruments to measure glare, and then there's others that are very simplistic. I think our philosophy was just to treat these like any other accessory use and hopefully just try to mitigate impacts. We've identified, I think, things that make sense to regulate. There's obviously some questions, though, that we have, and there may be things that we missed, and that's what we wanted to bring before you this evening. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Amy. So we have 3 different system types in the draft regulations Todd and I started working on. First will be building mounted. This is any type of system that's attached to any part of a building, be it the roof or the side of a building, whether that's a primary structure or a shed, garage, any type of building on the property. I guess even a chicken coop that Todd may have permitted could have solar panels on it at some point. Never know. Ground mounted, this would be any type of system that's on a structure or a pole or series of poles that's just meant to support the PV system, the solar arrays. And then the last is self-contained. This is I think we see a lot of these, like when you're driving down the road and you'll see a big PennDOT sign, they'll have a little solar panel on them. But there are a lot of folks who will install little self-contained systems, maybe it's a light above their garage or something like that. And that's the third type of system that we had in our regulations. Next slide, please. So for the building mounted systems, these would be considered a part of the building they're attached to. It wouldn't have any impacts to lot coverage or anything of that nature. We were recommending that there be a 30-inch pathway maintained around the edge of the roof, except on accessory structures. I know that was a question that was sent in of why would we require that? That is because a lot of first responders prefer to have some way to get up onto the roof in the event of a fire. If they need to get up there to cut a hole in the roof for ventilation purposes, things like that, they're not having to deal with a live electrical system that they could get shocked from. So having that 30-inch pathway is considered kind of a safety access for them. It's also a way for the property owner to get up on their roof and make repairs if need be. Some of the questions that we had and we'd like to get feedback on is, when we think about these and you think about a sloped roof, sometimes the slope of the roof is not sufficient to really point the panels at an angle that's beneficial. So how high above the sloped roof should they be allowed to extend? And then in some cases, I've seen regulations where when you're on the street and someone has the back of their home roof covered with solar panels, they don't let the solar panels go higher than the peak of the roof. So the peak of the roof that way is the top of the building. It doesn't extend above that just to get more solar coverage. Another question we had were about flat roofs. So you have a flat roof. I think the photo here in the middle is a good example. It's a flat roof on a multifamily building. Obviously, that's probably not visible from the street. That's something that I've seen a lot of regulations where they don't want to have these things sitting up really high that you can see them from the road. I don't know that there's any harm in it, but it was something else we wanted to get feedback on as well. So you can go to the next slide, please. So for ground mounted systems, much like we do now, we would treat these as an accessory structure. We need to meet all the setbacks of the district. One thing we felt was reasonable was not allowing them to be closer to the front yard line than the primary use. So the example of that solar flower, which I'd never heard of before, in the middle, that's I guess a special solar installation that tracks the sun. We felt that didn't make a lot of sense to allow them in a front yard unless the property owner could demonstrate they couldn't put them anywhere else. A height limit of 12 feet measured at full tilt. Some of these solar panels do change their tilt slightly when they're moving, sometimes tracking the sun. So as far as size restrictions, we had two different suggestions, one for residential, one for non-residential. For residential, we were suggesting that no more than 25% of the ground floor area of the home, or 500 square feet. Actually should read whichever is less. We were suggesting that whichever is less. So
that's good.
The other thing that we were recommending was no more than 15% of the lot area in other zoning districts. So obviously you have an agricultural use or a commercial use, they may need more solar panels to meet their needs than what a residential home would.
Do you have any information on that as being, I would assume that this would make the ground impervious.
That was my question.
Well, that is a matter of debate. There's some ordinances treat them as if they are just a building, so just lot coverage. Some don't. We were calling them out as lot coverage, so that would also fall, I think, under the impervious coverage, unless Todd disagrees. I think we were considering these impervious as well. But some ordinances are very different on that.
Hey, Todd, in my opinion, though, I mean, if you're putting these south facing on a hillside and covering a pretty good part of your property, that water's going to run off and make a small stream.
Well, it's definitely going to run somewhere. The meeting we had a couple months ago, maybe 3 months ago now, with the people that do solar farms, I believe told us that they don't cause a pervious versus impervious problem because at least in their applications, most ordinances have setbacks for solar farms, so the water's not running directly off the property, and they have the ability, or maybe they have the requirement within the land development process to contain the water. But from what they told us, the water pretty much stays right around the panel. So I guess that would be a good question for our engineer at some point in this process as to whether or not he would consider solar panel displays as pervious or impervious. If you look at the solar flower that Mark was talking about, I don't know that in that position is really going to affect storm water at all, or if it's going to direct water anywhere, or if it's going to keep any water from soaking into the ground. If you look at a bigger panel that sits almost flat, I think you could probably make the case that it is going to keep water from soaking into the ground underneath the panel. So I think
It looks like it in that picture with the cows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the cows would be hiding under there when it rains.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
that might very well happen too, because they want to take advantage of the imperviousness of the area. So I think it goes back to asking Jerry, our township engineer, his opinion on that, and see where that falls out.
Yeah, and right now we are still just talking about accessory use, so we haven't even gotten into any of the Public Utility Commission and other safety guidelines and everything that goes into a kind of an industrial, installation with the amount of acreage and everything else that goes with that, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's correct. And where in this one slide we're limiting it to 500 square feet max. Kent's probably more familiar with when you have to do stormwater. Is it 5,000 square feet on a lot typically, Kent, or something like that? So
yeah, definitely. And I mean, if you get into a solar farm, then you need to manage the stormwater for the larger ones. I had a question on one. So do we not allow solar farms as a primary use anywhere in Harris Township right now then?
We don't, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
yeah.
So another question we had on these ground mounted systems that we'd like some feedback on, and we're not suggesting that this should be the case, but should we have any type of fencing or screening requirements? It's something that I think I ran into where some ordinances have it and some do not. I think it's probably more of a matter of it's not necessarily a safety hazard so much of it is as a aesthetic type of control, but it's just something else that we wanted to get feedback from the Planning Commission on as well tonight.
Yeah, are we looking at a situation like a swimming pool that, what do they call it from a legal standpoint, a convenient nuisance or something like that, where fencing to make sure that no one is injured if they accidentally fall in the pool? Should we be considering fencing even in a private residential or farmette situation to keep people from accidentally injuring themselves on it? That's a legal thing maybe, as opposed to a just the Planning Commission discussing it. Don't you think?
It seems to me that fencing could be just as ugly,
Yeah.
burdensome as is not. So I don't know.
I wonder whether from a liability standpoint, it would be something that the homeowner would be encouraged to think about, or should we discuss it from a permitting process?
Mark can correct me if I'm wrong here, but of the dozens and dozens of examples we both looked at, some did have fencing, screening requirements. I think more did not. Some just referred to fencing, screening requirements they had elsewhere in their ordinance. They had a separate section in their zoning ordinance that dealt with fencing and screening of nearly everything. So I think, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most of the ordinances we reviewed did not have fencing and screening requirements, but some of them did.
Yeah, that's correct. I don't think that I would agree with you. It wasn't the vast majority, but there were some that did. And I don't know, it's not always clear from the ordinances what the purpose and intent behind the screening was. I've always read it to be more of a aesthetic issue because the fence, normally when I've read them, they had to have opaque screening fences. It wasn't just a fence to keep people from going up, I guess, and touching the panel. I don't know that the panels themselves are that dangerous just sitting there any more so than any other appliance that's plugged in. But I agree. It was kind of hit and miss, but it was more did not have than did.
I don't think, do we really want to get into judging aesthetics?
I agree. I don't either.
Has anybody
I
gone
don't-
up West Main
The only
Street
thing
and offended by
I
the
would
one?
be in favor of, I mean,
Are
I definitely would be in favor of not having them in the front yards. As you've shown that you couldn't have any closer than a primary use structure. And also that there'd be some types of regulations to minimize the glare from the facilities. But other than that, I don't see any reason to screen them.
I have a question about our process here. So we just, talked a little bit about fencing and screening. We didn't talk about the previous slide with building mountain systems and some of the questions there. So are we tonight listening to the overview and contemplating the multiple discussion points then they discuss them tonight in turn, or are we going to break this into, further discussions? What are we going to bite off here tonight is my question, I guess, in simple.
So I think, and Todd and Mark can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we envisioned was this was a good way to introduce what we were thinking on these accessory regulations, and to get some feedback. But certainly this isn't the first and last conversation we're going to have.
Of course not, but
Talk about this again next month as well as we move towards possibly looking at developing an ordinance. Because remember, we wanted our ordinance to be comprehensive, so we wanted to be all renewables, not just a solar ordinance.
Yeah, Chris, I think the reason we were talking so much about these particular things is those were the specific questions Mark and I had that we didn't know the answers to, and we really have to get some input from you folks before we move forward with more specific regulations just on this section.
okay.
So that, I think that's why we talked about them more.
And I
Great.
think the questions that were on the last slide, I was, we kind of stopped on this last one because somebody asked a question. I was kind of hoping to get feedback on any of them. If you want to wait till the end, if that would be easier, just that way we're not, kind of getting out of turn, that would be fine. Or we can always address those now, whichever is easiest.
It was me.
No, it's good. I mean, it's fine to ask. It's hard on the doing PowerPoint via Zoom to, hard to raise your hand. I can only see 4 of you. Well, actually, 4 of you other than myself.
Mhm.
So, if we can go to the next slide, and then we can always go back to those other questions later.
Let's do that.
For self-contained systems, this one's pretty self-explanatory, just limited to the size that just provides enough energy for the device it's mounted to. And they can't extend more than 3 feet above whatever the device is it's mounted onto. So there's an example of a street light with a battery box, and then also a smaller example of it's a real estate sign with a solar powered light on it. Those are pretty simple, I think, and self-explanatory. Next slide, please. So regulations for all of these, so for all 3 different system types, again, it really is intended only to be providing enough power for the use that's on the property and not for sale to other users. Again, it's not prohibiting the sale of excess power from time to time, but it should be sized appropriately for what the needs are. Panels need to have a tempered, non-reflective surface. Batteries should be placed in a secure container or enclosure if they are used. I know some of these systems do not have batteries, or just directly wired up to the home and then to the grid. No signage or graphic content other than a small manufacturer's logo. So no Coca-Cola advertisement on your solar panels or something like that. And then any glare or glint onto adjacent properties would need to be mitigated. And that's something we would want to flesh out, I think, a little bit of what is meant by that as we move forward. So that's the overview of the accessory. I did want to talk a little bit about solar as a primary use that was brought up earlier as well. This is something that we certainly want to have as a future discussion at an in-person meeting. The Board of Supervisors did have a brief presentation given to them during public comment at their meeting this month, and they agreed to hold a workshop possibly in July with a local engineer to discuss some of their experience in developing solar farms. One other thing we wanted to talk to you a little bit about related to this is I did participate in a Penn State webinar on solar leasing. And this was primarily for property owners who are considering a lease with a solar farm company. But there was a lot of good information in there. So some of that information that I thought was valuable was, in addition to having really good solar access, most of these solar energy producers are looking for land that's located within a mile or two of an electrical substation and near very large transmission lines. The proximity requirements are almost always a necessity in order to make it financially viable. I know right now there's one going in Potter Township, or there's one proposed in Potter Township. I think it's fairly close to a substation down, can't think of the name of the road, but heading towards Bollesburg. So anyway, it's something to keep in mind of where these things might go in the future if we were to permit them. About 5 acres of land typically produces about 1 megawatt of energy, but this declines as projects get larger due to the need to provide more infrastructure. It says a lot of Pennsylvania producers only assume 1 to 2 hours of optimal generation of power per day. That's what goes into their calculations on whether or not something will work. Solar leases will very often include more land than what will be utilized, and it isn't uncommon for the solar energy producers to back out of lease agreements as they proceed through the local permitting. Sometimes that's related to just the general costs. Other times it's related to difficulties in getting connections with power, the local power grid, and things of that nature. And then the last thing that they brought up that I thought was pretty interesting is that the current COVID situation has really created a substantial decrease in power usage, and that's having a negative impact on the value of solar energy production. In particular, some of the solar credits are going down in price, and they said that some of these speculative or more speculative solar projects may no longer be viable. The presenter did say that he said he's not very optimistic about large-scale solar in the very short term, but he believes once the economy picks back up, Pennsylvania will be much more viable in years to come. So that's the presentation that I prepared for this evening. So I'd certainly appreciate any questions or comments you have about the things that were listed on previous slides, or anything else that you may want to know about based on the presentation.
I have,
Mark?
go ahead. I have a
Jeff,
question
go ahead.
about the energy for sale. From what I've, about what I have done is that the panels are put on your house or they're put in your backyard, and you basically are selling your energy. So I don't know how you're going to word that. The power goes into the grid system and you get credits. So the power you produce this summer comes off your bill in the winter. I mean, most of these houses run positively in the summertime, in the the six or 7 months when we have some sunshine, and you build up credits, and then the power company gives you those credits in the wintertime. If you build up more credits than the energy that you use, they have to cut you a check. And so that's wording. It's pretty difficult because if your system is working really well, you could end up with a negative power consumption home, and then that electricity does go into the grid and somebody else uses it.
That's a good point. I think the definition that we pulled was kind of a standard definition. I don't know that there's going to be any checks of power bills anytime soon. I think the idea was, though, if that's the idea behind what an accessory system should be, that was kind of what was driving some of the limitations on size, based again on what we saw in other regulations. Because to your point, I mean, obviously, if someone owns a large home and they're a heavy power user, they put on a biggest system they're allowed to have, and then someone moves in after them that doesn't use a lot of power, they're going to naturally be at a disadvantage by having a credit build up they can't utilize. I don't think we're trying to penalize that, but it was really more to define what we were trying to regulate with the limitations.
Yeah, You didn't
It-
want a personal enterprise of a power station being
Right.
done.
Is
did
it
put- we
as
did put-
simple, is it as simple as saying it shall not be used solely for the generation of power for the sale of energy to other users? Because you're using it for yourself first, and then if you generate more, it goes off to the grid. But the primary usage is for the property that it sits on, and then any additional generation goes off for sale, but it's not solely for sale like an industrial use would be.
I think the definition on the first slide more or less maybe reflects that to some degree, where it says it's creating power or thermal power primarily for on-site use.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah,
But-
I agree.
But a lot of the systems that you're installing, everything that you generate goes into the grid. I mean, I
Right.
don't know how to explain that to you. It just goes into the grid.
Yeah, but you're
and
also
then
drawing,
you get,
so there
it
is the
doesn't-
push and pull.
it doesn't stay at your house.
No,
And then it,
but as I say, there's a push and pull as opposed to simply a push.
yeah.
Could I jump in here? And I guess we all agree that we're good with this potentially as a secondary or as a non-primary use here is financial, right?
Yeah.
So we toss that back to Mark and let him figure out how to do that, how to word that.
I have one comment I'd like to add, and that is that this presentation really takes into account where we are today with technology, but not so much the developing technology like roofs that are solar or solar shingles. And so I think we want to have some sort of flexibility with what we're saying, that we're not stuck in the past as soon as we get out of the gate. So if we have some way to reflect coming technology, which obviously we don't know, but that we have a way to recognize that these aren't the only ways of generating solar that might exist.
It's a great point.
Yeah, I think the comment about the not optimistic about large scale solar in the short term, but there's going to be a market for it in the future is all the more reason for us to be proactive about things as opposed to just being reactive at a later time.
And I'm not so sure that I agree in how you came up with the square foot amount of solar panels that you're allowed to put, because 500 square feet, if I'm reading that correctly, it doesn't really match a large ranch house or I mean, you including the roof with the yard. I mean, if you have a 2,000 square foot ranch, that means the back side of your ranch house, you could have a 1,000 square foot panel just on your roof without ever putting anything in your yard. Are you limiting that person down to only putting 500 square feet on his roof?
No, it's only the ground mounted part. So the roof is completely open for them to put on whatever they want. In regards to panels, it's only the ground mounted that's not on a building.
Okay, so they can do both, and the only regulation is 500 square feet on their property, 50 by 10, or any way you want to. Okay.
Yeah, they can garage, house, all that can have solar panels just fine.
Can I ask a question about Amy's comment a couple of minutes ago? I've been thinking about that since you said it. If the solar panels are the roof, or they are the windows, or any other structural part of the building, that unless you know that those things exist, you wouldn't know that they were the solar panels. I wonder if we have to regulate them, because if they are serving the dual purpose of generating energy while serving as the roof or the windows or whatever. I think there will be regulations through Center Region Code that they have to address. I would guess that the zoning regulations in general would be somewhat self-policing as far as the roof structures because you only have so much lot coverage on a lot. And that would also be considered impervious coverage. I could still see there being situations where someone might have an extraordinarily large roof to generate more electricity than they need, despite the the relative ugliness of such for most people. But maybe we'd have to have something in the regulations to address that situation. But Amy, I just wondered if you know of any other such technology that we might have to think about when we write these regulations.
How about 1,000 gallon propane tanks and 10 kW generators? We're allowing them to be put on properties because I put them on properties and they are not good looking.
Well, thanks a lot, Jeff. So you're saying you're part of the problem, not the solution.
Well played. Yeah, I know there's an awful lot going on with photovoltaic shingles that are literally incorporated. I mean, the shingles themselves are the roofing material, not an addition to the roofing material. So when we get to the point where that starts to get, to infiltrate the buildings around here, then it's a zoning, or not a zoning, it's a code issue more than it is a permit issue. Dealing with fire safety and all the other things that go along with that. But I mean, they're out there. They're not cheap, but they're out there already.
Todd, you mentioned roof. Burkholder's Country Market in Potter Township, their entire parking lot is covered. Their roof, that is the roof to the parking, is solar panels.
Right.
So that, I mean, it's pretty big square feet. I mean, you're talking probably, I'm looking at the map now, probably 75 vehicles.
Oh, and
if not
people
more.
love parking underneath it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've parked under it.
And you could charge your car for free.
Yep.
If you shop there.
Yeah, and I wonder if somebody proposed that at the Unimart or, the Bollesburg Mart or some other business in Harris Township, what effect the impervious coverage limits would have on their ability to do something like that. Plus, in the Village Commercial Zoning District, we have some other regulations that might come into play.
Well, if they're putting it up over top of an already asphalt parking lot, it's not going to change their, impervious balance one way or the other, is it?
It probably wouldn't change their impervious coverage, but it would change their lot coverage if it's if it's roof-like structure.
Yeah, structure, subject to setbacks and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so the impervious coverage limits are typically a lot more than the lot coverage limits for structures. So they may be able to get away with impervious coverage on most lots, but I'm not so sure they can get away with the lot coverage on all of those lots.
And I have only, I know that when we deal with like an industrial installation, because you're dealing with a commercial entity, there's got to be a certain amount of bonding, just like there is in any kind of mining or something like that. Are we considering anything there with a home installation, or is that just something that, you assume that if something goes wrong and there's a spill or somebody vacates the property and leaves all that stuff there that it needs to be demolished, whose responsibility that is?
Are you talking about like the decommissioning regulations? Yes. That's something that Mark and I did talk about a little bit in relation to the accessory solar things. And usually those things, you don't see too many abandoned houses in Harris Township. Those things change hands.
We're very fortunate in that regard.
Yes, and let's hope it stays that way. But I think a smarter, informed home buyer, if they see a solar array on a property, would hopefully inquire as to the age and the expected life expectancy of that thing and make whatever appropriate adjustments with the sales agreement they would have to do to either replace the panels or dispose of them, either if they didn't want them anymore when they bought the property or they ended their useful life. So I don't know that that's something that we have to address in the ordinance, but certainly entertain arguments to the contrary.
Yeah, because I imagine there's going to be environmental issues with the wiring and with any batteries and or transformers or, power transfer equipment, not just with the panels themselves.
Yeah, and I would wonder if someone was going to remove something like that, if that would be one of the things that would trigger a demolition permit through Center Region Code, and they would have to provide information to the code office as to how they were disposing of those types of things, since my understanding is the panels themselves are considered hazardous waste.
Yeah, so that needs to be something that gets tossed into this ordinance as far as, a demolition permit being required if they're being removed.
Well, I don't know that we could put that in our ordinance because we don't issue demolition permits. That would be a code thing. I guess we could check with the code office and find out if they have anything on the books now that currently cover that. And if not, we might be able to have that added the next time we update our building codes.
Firmly suggest such a thing.
Firmly accepted.
One other thing, I noticed, okay, two nitpicky points. We talk about a lack of, signage being prohibited, but we talk about it from an advertising standpoint, but I'm wondering whether there's any sort of safety signage that we should mandate.
Yeah, in our sign ordinance, there are exceptions to what you can and can't do with signs in pretty much every situation. So again, it's one of those things that we would probably have to talk to the code office or our solicitor to find out if we do have some responsibility to require some kind of safety warning. If not, I think if they follow the guidelines of our sign regulations that permit signs that are very small and lack commercial advertising, if they want to do that on their, on their own dime, I think that is perfectly fine.
I think there may be some requirements that some of these panels, upon installation, both the manufacturer may already just put warning signs or labels on the panels anyway.
Right. And that's kind of what I'm thinking is we don't want any conflict if that is the case. So
we can always clarify that no signage other than a small logo and any required safety signage.
Yeah.
Something of that nature. Or
yeah. And then the self-contained systems, the speed tracker down in Linden Hall.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sort of thing we're talking about with this sort of thing, that we just want to make sure that it's not, the panel itself is not too big for the use.
Yeah, that would be on properties. I think stuff in the right of way that's a mobile, part of infrastructure for the roadway is different. But yeah, this would be on the property. Somebody again has a light. Probably most likely thing you'll see. Sometimes you'll see, outside a water pump or something could possibly have one on. I've seen examples, but I don't think we'll run into that issue in Harris Township.
There's an awful lot of remote sending stuff that happens at
right.
Pump stations and that sort of thing where they've got a panel. Okay.
Hey, Todd.
Yeah.
One of the biggest pushbacks on these ground-mounted systems is their visual aspects. They don't look nice. And I don't think necessarily in an ag area or a forest area, it's, at a bigger piece of property, it's an issue like a farm or something like that. But it is kind of an issue in an R1 or an R2 area. And is there some way that, I know we don't want to get into aesthetics, but is there some way that we can push the homeowners into maybe through Greenscape, being able to hide these a little bit in our zoning? So you won't get that pushback from 5 different neighbors saying they look like hell. I mean, you don't have to plant trees around them, but you could definitely plant bushes around them so that you wouldn't see them so much.
planting trees rather defeats the purpose.
Yes, but a little forsythia goes a long way.
Yeah, I've recently been made aware that we have a bunch of ugly propane tanks in people's yards. And I think we ought to focus our efforts the next 6 or 8 months on trying to do something about the propane scourge. But
I don't know whether you guys know it, but there is a pretty substantial ground solar array up here at the top of Main Street across from Bailey Lane. And I drive by it regularly, and I'm not annoyed by it at all.
Right. Now, Mark and I actually did talk about some kind of landscaping treatment to hide these things from view of the street. It seemed to us that there would be some situations where that would be pretty easy to do because of the slope of the land, and then there are houses and other things that are on the property that sit on the highest part of the property, where it would be basically ineffectual unless you made them plant a full-size tree or a bush or something in order to do that. So I think it would be hit and miss, and I think it's always one of those things we can play by ear. If we have an ordinance in effect in a year or so, and the first 10 things that come in, if they do come in within a year, everybody seems to complain that they're ugly, and people stop complaining about all the propane tanks for some reason.
Yeah.
Then we could always amend the ordinance and find a way to address that. But like we said earlier, hardly any of the regulations that we looked at had any kind of screening requirements, be it fences or foliage.
Okay.
So should we continue this conversation next month?
Do we want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the questions on building mounted systems to give these guys some direction? The 30-inch question, height above flat, height above sloped. I'll say that I think the 30-inch perimeter makes a lot of sense for the reasons you stated. I'm unclear in my mind about the height above roof questions brought up. Look forward to hearing what people have to say.
I'm actually kind of intrigued by that, because for all the time I've spent in southern Delaware, and almost every home has the roof half or more covered with panels, I have never seen any elevated from the pitch of the roof. I'm sure it's done, but I can't. That's a new one on me. I think that's the sort of thing that I'm kind of ambivalent about it, because I can't see anybody doing much more unless you've got a flat roof, and in that case, then we don't want it to be seen from the street, essentially. I don't know whether I'm not talking my way through this the way I'm thinking it. I'm sorry, but I think that a limitation on pitch above a sloped roof is a good idea. I just don't know what the limit should be.
The only thing I'll comment is, make sure that there's something in there to limits the mitigation or mitigates glare or, prohibits glare on the adjacent properties.
Yeah, and that would be one of the reasons to limit the slope, because you don't want it blasting in somebody's bedroom window first thing in the morning. Todd, are we in a situation, is it an FAA requirement that the glare not be an issue near an airport?
I didn't read that anywhere.
Okay, I've heard 5 miles, no more than 5 miles, nowhere inside a 5-mile perimeter to a commercial airport. But I don't remember whether that was just an industrial application that I read.
That's something I can look into, Bill. I know that our Patton Township planner, I think our current planner and previous planners had to deal with that when they created regulations in Patton Township, since they're right next to Benner Township.
Right there, yeah.
And I want to say that there really wasn't a lot that they had to deal with in terms of glare, unless they were within a certain zone around the airport, and it was fairly close. Just because I don't think it bothers the planes if they're fairly high up and not on approach. So
yeah, and my assumption would be that it would be more concerned for a commercial operation where you would get a blast off of a lot of square footage as opposed to just on a roof or in a backyard.
right, I think for the most part, there's whatever regulations deal with like roof reflection, or people have metal roofs that can cause the same issue in location close to an airport. But I'll look into it just to verify.
Okay.
I'd like to suggest that we continue having the conversation about this at our next meeting. It seems like we have a lot to discuss about it.
I tend to agree.
Okay here.
Yeah, it sounds like I think the planning commission should all be able to get solar panels on their roofs and have them for a year to see actually what we really want to talk about.
Are you volunteering to install them for cost?
I'll install them for nothing if you give me the panels.
I might take you up on that.
Don't forget about his LP gas tanks.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't really want one of those in my backyard.
So is there a motion that I need to make in order to carry on the conversation? in
No,
June?
we'll make sure it gets on the June agenda. I just put a note
Okay.
down on my paper.
Great.
So are we at a point where we can discuss the rest of the June agenda?
Yes. The only other item I have for June is the wellness center request. I don't know what Mark and Todd might be feeling.
I think it really comes down to whether or not, are we planning on a virtual meeting again next month, Amy?
Well, so our stance on these virtual meetings is that we want to keep the public not in the building until we go green. Once the county goes green, then we'll look at a reopening of the building, and we can probably look at, depending on what the regulations say, because of course we need to see how many people we can have, and we'll have to figure out if we still have to do 6 feet. You guys might be a little harder than the board because there's more of you to spread out, but tentatively I would say it's probably going to be virtual. I have no idea when we're going to go green. No one seems to know that, but or we might have to look at a hybrid where some of you come here and some of you are. We found with the board I can project my screen up onto the screen, and that seems to work pretty well for other people that are in the room. So
I was going to suggest that I can also bring some R1, since the permitted uses discussion has happened now. I can bring maybe some other information forward for the planning commission to at least consider.
Well, she can share screens now, so, we worked out that technology tonight.
yes, yeah, I'm excited. I've never done that before, so that's good.
So will we be able to learn some stuff? And I think the guy's name is Steve Greer, not Stephen Green from the ARM group. Is it possible that we could do that meeting and learn more about solar there?
Yeah, it was actually supposed to say Stephen Greer, but I was like doing 7,000 other things at the same time. So that's why it says Stephen Green on the agenda. But yes, he spoke with the supervisors at their meeting last week. And what we've tentatively discussed is July 22nd, if the fire hall is back available for use, we would have an in-person session with him to look at, he's been doing these with CBICC and some others, to look at solar uses. This would be the primary stuff, primary solar uses, solar farms, that kind of thing. So he's someone that actually I've known for a while because he used to work in the recycling world. He worked for Blazowski Associates, and now he does this. He's an engineer. He does this engineering for the solar stuff as well, and he knows Bud and Frank, I think, pretty well on the Board of Supervisors. So we'd be looking at tentatively July, I believe it's 22nd. But again, that's all up in the air because that depends on, the fire hall's not open to the public yet. And again, depends on when we go green and when they're open to the public.
Maybe that would be a good tentative thing to get our questions in line, so, how much glare does it have? He should be able to answer that question.
Yeah. That's the conversation that he and I had, was that ahead of that meeting, like well ahead of that meeting, we would have the board and the planning commission and staff submit questions for him so that he can tailor the presentation to our specific needs.
And anything else anybody can think of. I mean, to me, it would be the glare. It would be the runoff for water, and anything you guys want to add. I think that if we get to do this, we get to talk to somebody who knows a lot about this.
I'm in.
Maybe he'll give us free panels.
To charge our cell phones.
Sorry,
Meg,
did I jump ahead? I'm
Yes.
sorry.
are we at a point where we are ready for reports, or Mark, do you have anything else you want to throw at us for next month?
I think for now, we'll probably just the R1 and the accessory solar. And then if we meet, depending on how we meet, we may have some other things, I think.
Do we have any reports?
Well, there have been zoning permits issued since we last met, but there's no way to circulate them. So I figured I'd put off typing up the reports until we can actually do that.
I'm okay with that. I'll sign whatever you want me to sign when the time comes. All right. Amy or George, anything to report?
The Center Region Planning Commission did meet. We met virtually. We talked about a variety of things. We had already begun doing a study of workforce housing. And since so much has changed since the study began, we're going to continue to have that be reviewed. Quite a lot of questions about vacancies and the concern with the development of these new properties and vacancies closer to downtown or older properties. But there's so much unknown right now. It will be a conversation we'll continue. The CHIP will probably be an abbreviated process this year, and it may just be that what was planned for this year will get moved to next year. That all the projects have either slowed down or stopped such that it would be difficult to complete them this year. We also approved meeting virtually, so we were officially legal. We also talked about the transportation improvement plan process. Right now, there's a lot of change happening in terms of how people are moving and what they're willing to move in. And so planning for future transportation is also up in the air. Apparently there's a surge nationally with more biking. And so having a more comprehensive plan that doesn't include some of the things that are emerging as more important, we'll want to be thoughtful about. So there'll be some planning that needs to be done. We'll also be looking at a change in funding. Since nobody's driving, the gas taxes will be impacted, and so there'll just be less money to fund projects in the future. However, the interchange project is moving forward since that has already been funded. And that's about it. So that's our report.
As for the CCMPO, there has not been a meeting. We did get some notifications regarding the fact that the interchange project is moving forward. It's out for bid as of April 30th. That's, the initial phase study of that project. The State College area connector work The design work is contracted and is underway on a limited basis at this point, but it has started moving forward. On Wednesday evening, there's a Zoom meeting regarding the 21 to 24 tip and the 2020 air quality report, which I plan on attending that meeting on Zoom. The tip is out for public comment, and it's expected to meet the coordinating committee's approval by June 23rd, subject to results of these Zoom meetings and public comment. That's what I know. But again, it's pretty much a one-way street with just emails coming in at this point. Wednesday will be my first exposure to a meeting with the group.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Amy. Anything else?
Nope.
Wow. Sounds like somebody was taken off from the airport there.
Sounds like margaritas are being made in the blender.
Yeah, really. I hope there's enough to share.
That's why Deb turns her video off, so you can't see her making
There you
margaritas.
go. You can't see her making margaritas. Anything else for the good of the order, folks? Otherwise, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all,
Thanks,
There you go.
everybody.
Good to see you guys.
in whatever limited manner it was.